Now that we are getting into the thick of the offseason, we've had a chance to take a look back at some of the players in our Dynasty rankings and identify those who are shooting up our rankings and why that is the case. We're going to cover 7 different players in today's video. Spoiler, none of them are Chicago Bears, even though Ben Johnson just signed to be their next head coach literally about 20 minutes before we're recording this. But Ty, one player who has been tearing it up in the playoffs so far this offseason is Washington Commanders quarterback Jayden Daniels. He is now our quarterback 3 in Dynasty formats. He's the quarterback 6 in fantasy points per game this last season, finished with 3,568 passing yards, added nearly 900 rushing yards as well, which was second to only Lamar Jackson. And he had a very nice 69% completion percentage, which was actually 9th of all quarterbacks with 50-plus dropbacks. We know the rushing upside is absolutely huge for Jayden Daniels. It's crazy to think that this is only his rookie season, and he has now led this Washington Commanders team to a massive win over the Detroit Lions to now the NFC Conference Championship game. Can it actually get better for Jayden Daniels in 2025?
I don't see why it can't. I mean, when you are a rushing quarterback, your floor is automatically higher than most other quarterbacks in fantasy football. And for Jayden Daniels, with an elite weapon like Terry McLaurin, with the potential to bring in another elite weapon as well, I don't see why Jayden Daniels can't take another step after what was already an incredible year. I don't see why he can't finish as a top 3 quarterback again next year. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he is if he finishes as actually, I was about to say like he could finish as a quarterback 1 overall. It's like, well, no, because Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts like to rush for 13 or more rushing touchdowns a year at this point. But again, like Jayden Daniels, in some weird way, I feel like I'm well positioned to say this. Jayden Daniels had the year that we wish Anthony Richardson had this year, right? And because of that, the sky's the limit for Daniels moving forward.
What I really want to see out of Jayden Daniels next year to really see if we can take his game to the next level. Look, Cliff Kingsbury, we got to get out of this like a horizontal raid offense, right? We got to start pushing that ball downfield. Jayden Daniels was one of the best, if not the best, deep ball throwers in college football back in 2023. And you just look at this last season. I mean, he was only 26th in ADOT, 37th in deep throw percentage. Only 9.6% of his attempts were considered deep throws. I want to see Jayden Daniels push the ball downfield more. You have a guy like Terry McLaurin, who we've seen it in the playoffs. I mean, we saw it against the Buccaneers, right? You saw that beautiful down the sideline go route over the shoulder catch from Terry McLaurin. That was beautifully placed by Jayden Daniels. I want more of that because we know what Jayden Daniels can do as a rusher. I could sit here and tell you that, yeah, I want to see Jayden Daniels rush for 9, 10, 11 touchdowns next year, because that I think will absolutely push him into the Josh Allen echelon. But I want to see Jayden Daniels throw the ball downfield more. I want to see his passing yards, up to 4,300 yards. I do want to see him get to those 7-8 touchdowns. But man, Cliff, we got to get out of this horizontal raid, man. I want to see that ADOT go above 7.8. I want to see that deep throw percentage, be in the at least the top 15, top 20 in the league. That's one of the things that I am just longing for from Jayden Daniels. I don't know if it's like totally going to bump him up to, quarterback 2 overall in fantasy football, but that is one of the things that I think will take him from not just being a rushing quarterback, but being a quarterback who could do it in every facet of the game, like a Lamar Jackson, like a Josh Allen.
Yeah. Lamar Jackson this year, just for some perspective, right? The quarterback 1 on the year, 4,100 yards, 41 touchdowns, along with 900 rushing yards and 4 rushing touchdowns. Obviously, if we can get those numbers, like, holy cow, like Jayden Daniels is like arguably going to be like the greatest quarterback to ever play the game then. But like you said, if we can get some more big plays, if we can get some more passing touchdowns out of Jayden Daniels, again, because he only finished with 25 this year, and that's not a bad number by any stretch of the imagination. But if we can jump that into the 30s, like Jayden Daniels automatically kind of elevates himself, puts himself into that rare tier where you will find a Josh Allen and you'll find a Lamar Jackson in terms of fantasy quarterbacks.
100%. That's where I want to see Jayden Daniels next year. Like, if I have one hope, it's that he can push himself into that Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson tier for next year. And I think people are going to be ready to do it. I would not be surprised at all if Jayden Daniels is actually the quarterback 3 taken next year behind Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. Before we go any further, though, want to make sure you all over on YouTube know that we are with you the entire offseason. We are bringing you Dynasty and NFL draft content all throughout April and May. So if you want to be along for the ride, make sure you hit us with a subscription, turn on those notifications as well, so you'll be alerted when all of our newest episodes are up. I promise you will love being a part of the fellowship, because all we do is talk NFL, fantasy football on this channel to make sure you are well prepared for your fantasy football league. So we appreciate all of you who have joined the ride already. For those of you who are joining us now, we look forward to having you on board. Let's move on to the running back position, Ty. Let's talk about Bucky Irving. He is our consensus Dynasty running back 12. And at the start of the season, you mentioned this in the podcast intro. If you're watching over on YouTube, we have our audio feed as well. Feel free to subscribe to that. You mentioned in there, this is a guy who was not even on our radar this year, right? Almost everybody in the industry still had Rachaad White ranked as at least a top 20 running back, if not a top 15 running back. On the season, Bucky Irving finished as a running back 13 overall with 1,122 rushing yards. He averaged 5.42 yards per carry. That is 6th of all running backs with at least 50 rush attempts. And you know what? Icing on the cake, 392 receiving yards, a top 10 number of all running backs this year. How confident are you that Bucky Irving can sustain his production and his involvement in this offense going into 2025? Because I think that is the big question. Can he continue to hold off Rachaad White, or do the Bucs potentially look at bringing in somebody else to maybe not have Bucky Irving shoulder the entire thing?
I feel like what they have right now with Bucky Irving and Rachaad White is a good partnership, that you don't need to bring in a third running back into the mix, because we had talked earlier
Tucker's
this
there.
year. Well, that's my point, though, is they were saying like we need to get Sean Tucker more involved. And then when they tried to, that's when the run game did kind of take a step back. And when they went back to Bucky Irving and Rachaad White, they complement each other really, really well. Bucky Irving, in his first year, 224 carries for nearly 1,200 rushing yards. He was the 8th highest graded running back per PFF this year. So the dude really, I don't want to say that Bucky Irving was the only thing that really solved the rushing game for Tampa Bay, because we all know that when Rachaad White was the only back there, there was a lot left on the table, you could say, for that run game in Tampa Bay. But now with Bucky Irving and Rachaad White kind of complementing each other, it kind of worked out. And I think back to then your question too of like, can he maintain this moving forward? I'd say yes, as long as Liam Cohen stays in Tampa Bay.
Oh,
Liam Cohen,
there's a condition.
If Liam Cohen does leave and go somewhere else, I'm going to be very curious to see who they then, hire or promote to the offensive coordinator spot, because I do think that the system did help. It helped repair the offensive line in the run game, because again, for years past, Tampa Bay's offensive line, when it came to the run game, wasn't the most desirable, was not the most ideal to run behind. But I think the scheme and the system that Liam Cohen brought into Tampa did solve a lot of those things. So if Liam Cohen leaves, not to say that like Bucky Irving drops out of my top 15, top 20 completely, you do need to kind of lower expectations then, because again, I think that highly of Liam Cohen.
I mean, and let's say Liam Cohen does leave, because at this point, the Bears job isn't available. Ben Johnson is there, but Ben Johnson isn't going to Jacksonville. That means, which that's like probably the most popular spot that's been speculated for Liam Cohen, is to end up in Jacksonville. Whoever comes in, they need to bring a man gap concept scheme, because Bucky Irving was 10th in success rate in man gap scheme this last year. And I know I was one of Bucky's biggest critics coming out of the draft. Look, he made me look stupid because he was still 9th in explosive run rate. 6.8% of his runs went for 15 plus yards. And boy, that dude made people miss. 6th in forced missed tackles as well. He was 3rd in forced missed tackles per attempt. I think the talent is there for Bucky. I need the system to be there, though. I want to have confidence that next year I can walk in and say, you know what, Bucky Irving, I don't know if I would be drafting Bucky Irving as a top 12 running back in redraft formats, but in dynasty formats, it's tough to not have Bucky there right now with how phenomenal he was over the back half of the season. The other thing that I don't think people are also fully aware of is that this isn't just a Bucky Irving getting the rushing work and Rachaad White getting the passing down work. I mean, when you look back half of the season after Tampa's bye week, Bucky Irving out-targeted Rachaad White 24-16. So Bucky was getting his own in this passing game too. So it's interesting how this Liam Cohen system kind of benefited both running backs, still played to their strengths, yet Bucky Irving was still getting his share of the targets and was obviously dominating in touches, 111 rush attempts to Rachaad White's 64 from week 12 on as well. Does Bucky fall in your rankings if Liam Cohen moves on? I mean, I know you mentioned if Liam Cohen stays, you got all the confidence in the world, but what if Liam Cohen moves on? How does that impact your ranking then?
I think it would drop in probably a spot or two, but because you don't want to overdock Bucky because, like you said, the dude is talented, right? He showed that in Oregon and it came through this year. So again, you don't want to ding him too much for something that he can't control. But I feel like it's a twofold thing. If you don't bring in the right coordinator that I don't think can at least, continue the success that Liam Cohen had in this Tampa offense, you're going to see some kind of regression. And like I said earlier too, it's not going to be like outside the top 20 kind of regression, but it's not going to be like the top 10 running back that he was towards the later half of the year.
Let's talk about another rookie here, Ty. Brian Thomas Jr. I mean, talk about phenomenal rookie seasons. People are like, really? You held out on talking about Brian Thomas Jr. for this long? He's our Dynasty wide receiver 8. The people are even more nuts about Brian Thomas Jr. I believe he's been pushed up to like wide receiver 5 over on sites like Keep Trade Cut, which a little rich for my blood, but hey, you know what? He did have a phenomenal rookie season. He was a wide receiver 4 overall, 1,282 receiving yards. That was third to only Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, who both went for 1,500 plus yards, 87 receptions on 133 targets. Those are both top 15, 10 touchdowns as well for icing on the cake. Liam Cohen to Jacksonville, not inked yet. Is that what it takes for you to have more confidence in Brian Thomas Jr.? Because out of the three of us, you have been the most hold on, pump the brakes. Let's not get too excited on Brian Thomas Jr. here. Meanwhile, Cameron and I are like, off the walls crazy about Brian Thomas Jr. So what does it take for you to get to that level of excitement for us? Because truly, I think Brian Thomas Jr. I'm not going to say I don't think he gets to that Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase level. That's a crazy thing to say. But I do think he cements himself as like a constant A-tier wide receiver in fantasy rankings next year.
I think what it comes down to is if you get the coordinator right, the ceiling grows then for me versus if you get it wrong. And when I say wrong, let's start here. The offensive minds that they've interviewed so far, Kellen Moore, Todd Monken, Liam Cohen, Joe Brady, and they interviewed Ben Johnson, but of course Ben Johnson's now in Chicago. If you hire Liam Cohen, if you hire Kellen Moore, I would probably say that the ceiling goes up. If you hire a Todd Monken,
like Kellen Moore, man, I think that could be fun. I know people love to hate on Kellen Moore. That could be one where, like, you know what? If Kellen Moore ends up there, that wouldn't be the worst in the world. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure Kellen Moore gets his flowers. We're some of his biggest fans on this pod.
Yeah, for sure. So again, if you hire one of those two guys, I think again the ceiling is then there for me. I think the best way to describe again what we saw from Brian Thomas in my eyes for moving forward is that if we don't get the coordinator right, it's going to be this year in, year out. Now that sounds harsh for again a wide receiver 8 for like our consensus wide receiver 8. That being like my hope is that I want to see the right coach come in and put Brian Thomas in the right spots in the offense. Kellen Moore, great example because we've seen that before in Dallas with CeeDee Lamb moving into the slot with Kellen Moore, right? So you could talk about a Todd Monken and Joe Brady. Those guys lead good offenses, but I don't know if they are going to tailor the offense to a Brian Thomas Jr. That's what I want to see. So There is hope for Brian Thomas. Again, our consensus wide receiver 8. I'm not doom and gloom, but you guys would argue that he can crack that like top 5 dynasty wide receivers. I'm not there yet because I need to see, can you improve from Doug Peterson? If you can, sweet. Then I can see the path, but I don't see that path right now with, again, there's no leads or anything, but if you do bring in a Tom Monken or a Joe Brady, it's going to take some more convincing for me to, maybe need to see a season first before recklessly speculating that he can be a top 5 dynasty wide receiver.
And to be transparent, we'll give the people a peek behind the curtain here. Cameron and I had Brian Thomas Jr. as our dynasty wide receiver 8. You have him at 9. So it's not like you're all that far behind us. You're just less skeptical or less optimistic on the upside that Brian Thomas Jr. could break into next season. The points you bring up with Todd Monken and Joe Brady are spot on. And I don't think those can be overstated. Because look at Todd Monken, what he's doing in Baltimore. Is Zay Flowers this elite star wide receiver 1? Now we can sit here and say those are two different types of players, right? Like 100%. I'm not going to sit here and tell you Brian Thomas Jr. is Zay Flowers. Those are two different football players. Joe Brady, he's working with what? Khalil Shakir, all respect to Dalton Kincaid, like Amari Cooper, but he's not making Amari Cooper the alpha. And we've seen Amari Cooper be a wide receiver 1 in an offense before. Rather, we've seen that from Kellen Moore. We've seen Liam Cohen make both Mike Evans and Chris Godwin happen at the same time. Like there's proven success for fantasy wide receivers in those offenses where I think it's got to be one of those two guys. I do think you're right in that regard. Where I'm optimistic for Brian Thomas Jr. though is just the profile, because what I didn't want to see, we talked about this when we were covering him coming out of LSU into the NFL draft last year, is that he did one of two things. He either was a deep ball guy or he ran curls. His route tree was so limited, and now you're seeing his route tree all over the field. Like his 11.8 ADOT is telling me, okay, he's not just running 8-yard curl routes. He's not just going for 40 yards down the field. They're actually using him drag routes over the middle. They're using him across the field, getting the ball into his hands. He was 5th in yards after the catch, right? These are things that I love to see out of a potential future star in the NFL. Brian Thomas looks the part on tape. I need the coach there to make it happen so he can make that Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase leap. If let's say they land Liam Cohen or Kellen Moore, what are the odds you put on Brian Thomas Jr. taking that Justin Jefferson size sophomore leap next year? And for context, for Jefferson in his rookie season, we're talking 1,400 yards to 1,600 yards. We're talking 125 targets to 167 targets, 88 receptions to 108 receptions. I mean, that is a big leap. But let's ballpark it. What are the odds you put on him being within that ballpark?
I guess you could say it's more than likely, likely to more than likely. I wouldn't say it's a guarantee. I definitely wouldn't say there's no shot of it happening. But again, the minds and the systems that come with the person would put a player like Brian Thomas Jr., despite this team already having the likes of Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram, despite having those players as well, they are going to want to get the ball into Brian Thomas Jr.'s hands for a guy that, again, for an incredible rookie year, wide receiver 4 overall, did that in the offense that was 23rd in dropback success rate and 22nd in dropback EPA, right? Like it not to say that it was like nearly impossible, but that should tell you that Brian Thomas Jr. is that dude in this offense. So again, I would say it's more than likely then that we could see a similar jump to what Jefferson saw going into year 2, or I should say after year 2.
Sure. Yeah. After year 2. Yep. Lad McConkey is the other rookie wide receiver shooting up our rankings right now. He's our consensus wide receiver 13 in Dynasty. Finished as a wide receiver 13 overall this year with 1,149 yards. I keep wanting to say like 1,150 yards, and I'm like, that just sounds gross. 1,149 yards. That was actually 9th most in the league this year, Ty. Caught 82 passes on 112 targets, caught 7 touchdowns as well. Lad McConkey is good. Oh my gosh. Like,
He's really
I'm
good.
ready for the slot merchants this offseason to come out of the bush. Like it's Homer Simpson like going into the bush, except in reverse. They're like coming out to like start hating on Lad McConkey because he's a slot merchant, just like they did about Cooper Cup 3 years ago. I'm sorry, man. This dude is good. If the Chargers don't bring in another alpha wide receiver, and like alpha, is basically like anybody from, I'll say, T. Higgins to Garrett Wilson this offseason. If they don't bring in a guy like that, sky might be the limit for Lad McConkey, because my gosh, was that film against Houston was so good.
Look, Lad McConkey, really good at the football. Okay. And you said that, you let off with it. We were
Yes.
we were all over Lad going into the 2024 draft. Believe he was a top 5 wide receiver in the class for me, because I just saw the skill that he had. Obviously, the size profile doesn't, he's going to be very limited. Let me say it like that, right?
Yeah.
Most of his work came over the middle of the field, within 10 yards, in 10 to 20 yards of the line of scrimmage, which is great. He saw 33 targets over the middle of the field between 10 to 20 yards, according to PFF. Great, right? For a guy that wasn't exactly a yak merchant, wasn't exactly a downfield big play kind of wide receiver. That's all that we were really asking for. And for a guy in the slot in this Chargers offense that really wants to run the ball, but when they throw the ball, they're going to be insanely efficient at it. I mean, not to say that turnovers are the only efficiency metric to look at, but Justin Herbert only threw 3 picks this year.
Yeah.
Right. They took care of the ball. That means getting the ball to your playmakers, right? Putting it on them, and your playmakers getting open. Lad is exactly what that Chargers offense needed. I don't see any reason why this can't continue to continue to happen unless you bring in another receiver, right? If Lad gets more competition, it's going to get a little dicey, but man, Lad is just so good at football that you almost don't care about that. And you just want to say that I'm betting on the talent.
And I think you bring up a good point of, he wasn't a deep ball guy, but 2.57 yards per route run, that was 10th of all wide receivers this year, which is still a shockingly good number for Lad coming out of the slot. And the biggest thing, I think this is the most important thing too, Ty. We hear people talk about first downs per route run too, but Lad McConkey, the dude's a chain mover. All right, he's 11th in first downs per route run this year. So you get that early establish the run mentality from a Jim Harbaugh offense. And if you get the majority of those yards, first, second down, if you get a chain mover, Lad McConkey, get the ball across get us a fresh set of downs. I mean, that is just so invaluable to an offense. And that is a number that I think enough people don't talk about. And that actually carries a decent amount of importance to it too. So not only is Lad good at the football, he's a chain mover. He can play a wide receiver one kind of role for this offense. Nobody's going to sit here and tell you he's going to be Cooper Kupp. But you know what? We've seen Cooper Kupp play that kind of. The Rams won a Super Bowl with Cooper Kupp out of the slot as their wide receiver one. Again, I am not saying Lad's playing, a Cooper Kupp level of football, nor am I saying he will get there next year. But he provides this offense so much. And you know what? If they go into next season with him as their wide receiver one, it's going to be good enough for this offense. So, Lad isn't the flashy, look at all these fancy advanced metrics kind of guy. But you know what? He's going to be a target hog in this offense. He's going to be a chain mover for this offense. He keeps this passing game in sync, which I think is so invaluable in this Jim Harbaugh style offense. Let's take a quick break there, Ty. We will be back afterwards, and we'll have 3 more players that we're going to talk about who are skyrocketing up our Dynasty Fantasy Football rankings. Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100. Alrighty, we are back. So far, we have talked about Jayden Daniels, Bucky Irving, Brian Thomas Jr., and Ladd McConkey. One of the biggest breakouts of the year, Ty, was Chase Brown. He is our dynasty running back 9 on the season. He finished as a running back 10 overall, just 10 yards shy of 1,000 yards, only averaged 4.3 yards per carry. He was top 6 in running back targets and receptions, though. 360 receiving yards, 11 total touchdowns. Now, I do think when we look at the entire season for Chase Brown, I think it's going to be more accurate to look at his season from week 9 on. Because once Zach Moss was out for the season with the neck injury, this is where we saw Chase Brown pretty much do everything in the Cincinnati Bengals backfield. 10th in rushing yards per game, 9th in rush attempts, 5th in carries inside of the 5, which was 83.3% of the team's rush attempts inside of the 5. He was top 3 in targets, receptions, receiving yards at the running back position, and just averaging 20.6 fantasy points per game, which was fourth to only Saquon, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Bijan Robinson. Not bad company to be in. I'm going to ask you the same question I did about Bucky Irving, because I think that is the big question here. How confident are you that Chase Brown can return similar production going into 2025?
Fairly confident, I would say. I think Chase Brown, for as good as he was, he doesn't strike me as the guy in Cincinnati. I think there is the potential that Cincinnati could bring in a complimentary back to Chase Brown. Not to mention, you still have Zach Moss for 1 year, at least on the books. You could move on from him this year, but he could still be around, right? So I wouldn't say it's a foregone conclusion that Chase Brown has won the backfield in Cincinnati, that this is his backfield, and that no one else is going to be eating into his workload. I think there's a potential that Cincinnati could bring in somebody in the draft. They could sign somebody. Then that severely caps Chase Brown's upside for what, again, like what we said, being 4th in points per game from week 9 on, that's just not going to happen then. That being said, I also see the path where Cincinnati says, well, you know what? The strength of our offense is our passing attack, right?
Yeah,
they dived all in on the passing attack this year. They were first in pass rate over expectation. So if they want to keep building to that strength, Chase Brown was the perfect running back for that kind of offensive system that they run. So again, we're kind of in this like purgatory kind of limbo stage of just like, you know what? Like Chase Brown could be the guy next year, that they do kind of run it back with Chase Brown and Zach Moss, in which case I would be very confident that he could run it back. But if you bring in somebody like, I know, bring in really any competent other running back outside of Zach Moss. But like I would not be surprised if that running back gets used in this Cincinnati offense, and then the days of top 5 running back Chase Brown are just no longer.
I think it's so important to look at the explosive splits between Chase Brown in the receiving game versus in the running game. I think everybody was talking about the Zach Taylor quote from what it was like 2 months ago. I have it pulled up here. Zach Taylor on Chase Brown's touches. We've got to find ways to manage it. I like for Chase to touch the ball as much as possible. He's got the potential to be explosive on almost every play. Well, I'm sorry, looking at the advanced metrics. In the run game, it doesn't appear that way. 26th in explosive run rate. 38th in forced missed tackles per attempt as well. So in the run game, like, is that a little bit on the offensive line potentially not being the best run blocking unit? Potentially, can they improve that? Absolutely. Can that improve for Chase Brown? Sure, absolutely. But again, it came in the receiving game for Chase Brown over the back half of the season. And if they do bring in a Thunder kind of running back, Chase Brown all of a sudden isn't going to get the gobs of opportunities that he got, that he's not going to be 9th in rush attempts. He's not going to be 10th in rushing yards per game, despite not being as explosive. Like, he needed the volume to really capitalize in the run game. And if you bring in a Thunder to his Lightning, like we predicted with Zach Moss, I'm worried we resort a little bit back to the start of the season. Maybe not as dramatic, because I do think Chase Brown showed that he can shoulder the lead back duties in the Cincinnati backfield. But yeah, what is the run success rate going to be? Are the Cincinnati Bengals going to remain relying on the pass as heavy as they did? I think they'd be wise not to, because Joe Burrow, in a winning year, he's in the MVP conversation with Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen. I'm curious to see what direction Zach Taylor takes this offense, is if they go back to resorting so heavy on the passing game, and if they do bring in a competent Thunder that can actually stay healthy.
I'll say this though, like Cincinnati, like I said, has the out in Zach Moss's contract, right? 4.8 cap hit, 1.5 in dead cap. So from that standpoint, it does make sense to move on from Zach Moss. But when you think about like are you really going to let one go to bring another back in?
Yes, correct.
Right. Like
that's the question we need to look at. I was going to bring that up, but go ahead.
Because like the Thunder running backs that I'm looking at, just a potential free agents, like you're leaving out the draft, right? Because this running back draft class, boy, I'm so happy that we're getting this.
Oh, I know.
But like Najee Harris is one, Nick Chubb is another, but he's aging. You could do a J.K. Dobbins, but J.K. Dobbins, I don't know if you really want to pay him a whole lot of money with injury history. And again, like there are running backs out there that you can pay, but do you want to let one go to bring another back in? Because if that happens, if they let Zach Moss go, it's because they want to bring in another running back that's better than Zach Moss. And that's almost a nail in the coffin then for Chase Brown's status in Dynasty.
Shame on you for not bringing up AJ Dillon as well. The true definition of a Thunder back.
My bad. I should have said Dearness Johnson.
I just laughed that it's like the top of the list you look at. I mean, salary wise, it's Aaron Jones, Najee Harris, Jeff Wilson, AJ Dillon. Like, man, that.
Oh, I mean, well, like Jaylen Warren is another one. Like, if they bring in Jaylen Warren, that's like two very similar running backs that it's like, gosh, they're definitely going to be working. That's definitely a split at that point.
That'll be one to track, is who does Cincinnati bring in for a potential running back? If it'll be telling how much they want to rely on Chase Brown with their offseason moves and how they address the running back position going into 2025. But should he remain the guy, I do like sky's the limit. He showed he can play the lead back role in this backfield. He's going to be involved in the passing attack and be much more explosive through that area of the field. It'll just depend on the Bengals' offseason moves going forward. Let's talk about another wide receiver now, Ty. Jaxon Smith-Njigba has shot up our dynasty rankings to the wide receiver 14. His 2024 season, he finished with the wide receiver 9 overall with 100 receptions on 137 targets. Both of those were top 12, along with his 1,130 receiving yards. Only caught 6 touchdowns, but the important thing of note, he outperformed DK Metcalf in every category. The two, do you agree? I'll ask you this first. Do you agree that JSN is the wide receiver 1 in Seattle now, ahead of DK Metcalf? I should say, do you agree? Do you believe that?
I can't say that he's the outright one. I think it's 1A, 1B.
Sure. I can get behind that. I'm honestly probably more in that boat as well. You also don't have Ryan Grubb anymore. The team has moved on from him as their offensive coordinator after being one of the most pass-heavy teams in the league. I have mixed feelings on JSN. So I'm going to let you start, and I'm going to clean up whatever you don't touch on. Where are you at with JSN? Are you confident he is this rising, emerging star in dynasty formats, or is there like actually a decent amount of risk baked in here at wide receiver 14?
It would be malpractice to say that there is no risk baked in, like that. There is zero risk with JSN at this point, because when we did this, we thought that Ryan Grubb was going to come back, and he got let go. And it's not just
like shortly after the episode too. We're like, oh, gosh, you gotta be kidding me.
It's not just the offensive coordinator spot though. There's talk that Geno could be moved
true. Yeah.
I don't know if that is fan speculation, if that is someone went on to Spot Track or whatever and was like, well, actually you could move him and save a bit of money or whatnot, right? Like, for whatever, I'm just saying there's a possibility, right? Where there's smoke, there's usually fire. I mean,
potentially fire. Right.
We are in smoke screen season, so we do need to put on our thinking caps. But I think that there are a lot of things that can go against JSN, right? Quarterback moves on and you can't find a competent replacement for Geno Smith. And then you're going into the year with Sam Howell as your quarterback, which I don't think they should do that.
No, I don't see that happening.
But you also, again, your offensive coordinator spot, like there's so much that could work against JSN that could go wrong for JSN that, again, to say that he's the outright one, it just doesn't sit right with me. And I think I think it's safer to say, like, if you're going to buy in on a Seahawks receiver, you should buy in on DK more than JSN.
Okay, so that's interesting because DK Metcalf was the name I was going to bring up. Well, mostly because you have to when talking about JSN, but he's also one that a lot of people have been just kind of thrown around in trade funsies, for lack of a better word. Like you search DK Metcalf trade on Google. I know you get crazy results from that, but like immediately you see the Raiders, you see the Patriots, you see 4 potential trade partners for Seattle Seahawks wide receiver DK Metcalf. And like to maybe add some credibility to that too, like I've heard the good people of Underdog Fantasy, Josh Norris and Hayden Winks, they've thrown around like, DK Metcalf, if he does move on from Seattle, right? Like if DK Metcalf isn't there, I mean, you buy in on JSN as the wide receiver 1. But those splits with DK Metcalf on the field, dude, it's scary. It's a scary business here. You look at weeks 8 and 9 without DK Metcalf when he was out with injury. JSN, 3.6 yards per route run, 124 receiving yards per game. That was 3rd best in the league, 291 air yards. He was 2nd and was drawing a 30.2% target share, which was 5th best in the league. You bring DK Metcalf back, though, his 3.61 yards per route run dips back down to 2.3. His market share dips from 63.5 to 31.5, which makes sense because you can't not give DK Metcalf the ball. Goes back down to 70 receiving yards per game, but finishes as the wide receiver 21 in fantasy points per game. And you also can't sit here and say if they cut Tyler Lockett that it's going to get any better. That dude, Tyler Lockett, was drawing like 2 targets a game over the back half of the season. So I am slightly concerned that people are going to look at JSN season and say, sky's the limit. He's going to outperform DK Metcalf. He might outperform DK Metcalf again in year 3. I just think that is such a like pseudo copy paste way of looking at it, when I think there's actual downside that DK Metcalf can come back 100% healthy, could play more of that deep ball role in this offense. And if they don't start using JSN on the perimeter of the field more, we saw him thrive in that role. If they're going to keep him locked down in this like low ADOT, low yards per route run stuff, it just doesn't bode well for high level elite production. So like wide receiver 14, I think there is some risk baked in here. Is there an offensive coordinator that can come in and fix this for you? I should say fix this. For Ryan Grubb was so pass heavy, right? Like I don't think there's going to be anyone who comes in and is just like, yeah, we're just going to keep chucking the ball like crazy. Is there an offensive coordinator that could come in though, and you'd be like, you know what, I'm feeling okay about this?
It seems like they've kind of narrowed their list down to Clint Kubiak of the New Orleans Saints.
Okay. All right. Hey, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't laugh too much. Rashid Shaheed was all right this year. He was pretty dang good this year, but I digress. Sorry, just not the name I expected to hear.
Yeah. So there's that. But then the other name is I shouldn't say a no-namer, but he's a name that no one really knows. His name is Grant Udinski. He comes from the Minnesota Vikings. He's currently the assistant offensive coordinator.
Yep. I don't hate that.
Lot of fans, a lot of team blog pages are all over Udinski right now because not only, I should say this, Kevin O'Connell has sung the praises of Udinski before in the past, saying that he's going to be a future head coach and stuff. He's the one that I think I would feel a little more optimistic on.
Sure.
Because again, like Clint Kubiak,
look at what the Vikings did. Look at the high low what they did. Look at the high low they did with Jefferson and Addison this year. Do you want JSN to beat you for 20 yards after the catch across the middle of the field on a 15-yard crossing route, or would you rather let DK take the top off you for 50 plus yards? Right? Like that could be one that I don't mind.
Correct. Yeah, I think that's the one that most people want, and that's the one personally for me that'd be like, you know what, you know what, I've got some faith. I've got some faith that they can figure that out. But there is some risk with that because that would be the first time being a play caller. That would be the first. Yeah, there is some risk coming with that as well. But I think the offensive system that would be coming over would also give you some optimism.
Totally. I mean, and so let's close it out there. I think that's a great transition to then talking about Jordan Addison as well. Granted, if Udinski leaves to go for Seattle, I mean, Kevin O'Connell is still going to be there. There's still going to be this constant supposedly hopefully a constant presence. I don't know why people keep talking about Kevin O'Connell trade rumors. I think it's the dumbest thing in the entire world. I'm trying not to just let my hometown bias seep in here. I think it's stupid that people are talking about trading for KOC. It's never going to happen. But Jordan Addison, the wide receiver 21 in our dynasty rankings, finishes a wide receiver 21 overall this year on 63 receptions, 99 targets, 875 receiving yards. Those 9 touchdowns were a nice boost as well. But this is what we talked about with Addison, right? Well, once you saw the dynamic of this offense settle, you saw Sam Darnold willing to hang in the pocket this year. Our Justin Jefferson is bracketed, double covered over the middle of the field. So great. We're going to go ahead and just launch deep shots to Jordan Addison because, one, we've been nailing them. Sam Darnold was crushing them this year. And 2, if you're going to choose to take away Jefferson, well, Addison's our second option anyways. This is why you drafted him in the NFL draft to come in and play this role alongside him. The question is, can the Vikings make lightning strike 2 years in a row? If they bring back Sam Darnold, yes or no? Can JJ McCarthy step in and mimic what Sam Darnold was able to do this year? Where is your, gosh, I hate the level of confidence question, but I feel like that's a lot of these players who are skyrocketing up our rankings. It's like, man, we got some faith in these guys, but we also have to recognize there's some volatility here in these rankings too, because Dynasty is just a different ball game when you're looking at a multi-year sample rather than just a 1-year sample for redraft. So Jordan Addison, can the Vikings make lightning strike 2 years in a row? And how much do you think Sam Darnold's presence actually impacts that? Or lack of presence next year?
I think it's not so much on the quarterback, but I think it's the other players in this offense that really, for me, make Jordan Addison one of the more riskier investments to make in Dynasty, because there's a lot that you could look at and say, well, TJ Hawkinson coming off of his ACL injury, not being at a, maybe playing at 100%, but not really like delivering at 100%, right? There's that. If the Vikings somehow get a run game going next year, I don't know how that'll happen. Maybe
I don't know how that'll happen
offensive
either.
line.
Not a bad free agent class for offensive linemen, but
no, I mean, hey,
they got to go spend that money.
Trey Smith, come on over.
Please,
come on over,
please.
Please. But again, like if TJ Hawkinson comes back, which we're expecting, right?
Yep.
Your first action after an ACL injury, it's not going to be the best. So we're expecting a bounce back from TJ Hawkinson then. Yep. And again, if Minnesota gets a run game going, my concern is that Addison could be as involved as he was this year, right? Like you said, 63 catches, 99 targets. So it's not horrible, but they were 36th amongst all wide receivers. So at that point, then you are banking on touchdowns this year. The touchdowns just may not be there next year. And if you're going to get that usage again, it is fairly risky. But at the same time, like you said, what if TJ Hawkinson is kind of, I shouldn't say a shell of himself, but what if he isn't as big of a piece as he was before the injury? What if the Vikings don't get a run game going? Then Jordan Addison is going to be relied on like he was this year. So very similar to like Chase Brown in the sense that, like, depending on how their teams go about this offseason will tell you a ton about how you should view that player going into next year and into the future then. So again, back to your question though, just like, what's the level of confidence? I'm torn. Like, I'm right down the middle, 50-50.
That's how I feel like my attitude towards Jordan Addison last offseason honestly hasn't changed much going into this offseason. I think I still have the same questions. And I know we've now seen it 2 years. The touchdowns have been there, right? Which maybe that's like the thing we can just count on, right? It's like is he like Walmart Mike Evans, right? Where it's like, I don't know, man. All I know is that the touchdowns are going to be there. He can't keep it up. Jordan Addison might just be a touchdown machine. And we might just have to accept that after this next year. We'll see. But I don't think it depends on Sam Darnold, because I think JJ McCarthy can step in and play great. I know we only saw preseason action, but man, going back and just watching that Raiders preseason game, the way he was just willing to step up in the pocket, take a hit, and deliver an accurate deep ball downfield. I mean, I think he can mimic a lot of what Sam Darnold was doing this year really well. But the other thing I also think we have to consider, Ty, is like, let's not just think that this is just going to be copy and pasted into next year. Because what happened the last 2 games for the Vikings? Teams say, great, we'll bring pressure. We'll force Sam Darnold to think. So you can't throw the deep ball on us. You're either forced to make a tough throw to Jefferson. We'll take that man coverage bet. Or Sam Darnold has to be quick enough to realize, hey, I just got to dump it down. I just got to trust my out route. And the problem was Sam Darnold wasn't able to do that. So I think Kevin O'Connell is going to go back to the drawing board. But yeah, well, what role does Jordan Addison play? I do think we've seen him find success in the touchdown department, in the deep ball department as well. I think wide receiver 21 is right, but you know what? We were talking about Jordan Addison as like barely a borderline wide receiver 30 last offseason as well. Go ahead. You got this gross look on your face.
No, I want to be done talking.
Sorry,
about
that sounded rude. You got this worried look on your gross look on your face. Makes it sound like I'm insulting you. You got this worried look on your face.
So we're done. We're done with Jordan Addison.
Okay.
I don't want to move on too quickly. That's my.
I mean, Jordan Addison's our last player, but
yeah. So Robert Saleh has a second interview with the Jaguars scheduled for Friday. He acquitted himself well in the first interview, and now he's going to get a longer look. Typically, when when a coach is going to get a second interview, it's not like mass reported. It's reported, but it's not mass reported.
Yeah. It's whispered. Yeah,
it's whispered, right?
Hey,
so
notice this.
We talked about Brian Thomas.
Hey.
I think Robert Saleh is like a decent little coach. He's not an offensive mind, so it's really, again, it's going to come down to because the person that should have been fired was
well, let's go even above that. Yeah, well, yes.
Decided to put a teenager.
That team say bad because of bad management. Tap the sign, Josh Norris.
Exactly. So again, Brian Thomas Jr., cherry on top for Brian Thomas Jr. Again, now we need to be extra careful. We need to pay extra attention to who the offensive guy will be, depending on who the coach is. The cherry on top for Jordan Addison, the dude is still super young in a great offense with a great play caller. Wide receiver 21, for as pessimistic as we sounded, right, being 36 in the receptions and targets and all that stuff. I mean, wide receiver 34 and expected fantasy points per game. The age, the offense, all that stuff can produce these kind of higher finishes despite the usage.
We'll put a bow on it there, Ty. If you want to make sure you follow us on the other platforms as well, FF Fellas on Twitter, the FF Fellas on Instagram, Fantasy Football Fellas on Facebook. And hey, TikTok, we back.
We're
back. So back.
Yes.
We're gone for 14 hours. But you know what? We're back now. Oh man. But make sure you're subscribed here as well. We're gonna be predicting the top 25 picks in fantasy football drafts next year. We'll have some dynasty buys and sells coming up as well. So lots of fun dynasty and NFL draft content in store for you all. Make sure you subscribe, turn on those notifications so you know when all of our newest episodes are up here. Follow our personal socials as well. I am at Lucas1 on Twitter, Tyler_Plath for Ty. We'll see you later this week for a way too early prediction of the top 25 picks in 2025 fantasy football drafts. We'll see you then. Deuces.